Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 14, Episode 133. He is Ross McCorkle and Joe Clark. I am Alex Kozora. Thank you for hanging out with us and joining us here on this Friday, Steelers Nation. As you heard by my pause there, trying to recalibrate myself, Dave Bryan is out today. He's out in, I think, San Diego, enjoying the sunshine out there. So filling in for him today are Ross McCorkle and Joe Clark, two great contributors to the site. You guys have heard them before and probably seen them on the Depot Dive, which came out a couple months ago. That's been really well received. So they will fill in today, and we'll get our thoughts here on the Pittsburgh Steelers 2024 schedule, officially released, and also Cam Heyward, who is skipping the voluntary OTAs set to begin next week as he looks for a contract extension. So Ross and Joe, thank you guys so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Always a blast.
Yeah, I'm excited to be on.
All right, let's just dive right on into it, basically. The schedule came out officially. I know on the Wednesday show, we were getting some of the leaks. We kind of had, I think, about half the schedule, Dave and I, by the time we wrapped up the Wednesday show in terms of what was reported. All leaks that we talked about ended up being accurate, so there aren't any corrections, but we have the entire official schedule. And it is a tough one. We knew it'd be tough because we knew the opponents, and really, I think, regardless of layout, it was going to be just a tough schedule from a opponent standpoint. But the structure and layout, which is what I care about on schedule release day, makes it all the more challenging. So quickly, just the preseason here, it'll open up the season at home versus Houston on August 9th, and then at home against the Bills on August 17th before, I believe, going on the road to finish things up against the Lions. The date and time for that one is to be determined. Into the regular season, let's kind of break this down into just a couple of sections. We know the back half is really the most eye-catching and quirky and difficult part of the schedule. We'll get to that in a second. But opening up week 1 at Atlanta, Ross, I'll start with you. Are you surprised that they are going to begin the season at Atlanta and not Denver or somebody else? And just your thoughts on this week 1 game.
I think overall, I probably favored Denver in this situation with the revenge game. But I mean, having them back to back like this, and then I think Atlanta, just because they've got Kirk Cousins and there's kind of two castaway veteran quarterbacks that are going to be facing off against each other, Kirk Cousins and Russell Wilson. I think that's a nice storyline. The Arthur Smith kind of revenge game, that's a nice storyline. And, Raheem Morris and Mike Tomlin, there's a lot to like about the matchup, even if it isn't necessarily going to catch like the national attention. It should be a nice week 1 for fans of the teams.
Yeah, there's a bunch of really good local storylines. Joe, what are your thoughts here on this week 1 opener?
Yeah, obviously Russ against Kirk Cousins, Arthur Smith going back to Atlanta, kind of the two biggest quarterbacks to move, and then obviously Smith. So those are two storylines. I'm not terribly surprised at inserting against Denver because I think the NFL kind of wanted to get that maybe into a window that had bigger eyes, and it's in that 425 window in week 2. Obviously, week 1, there's a ton of marquee matchups that they can kind of push. Steelers Broncos might not have been the biggest draw for week 1, so they can kind of sneak it into week 2 there. I'm excited for the Atlanta matchup. It'll be a tough game, but a lot of storylines and should be a good one.
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting the way the season begins at Atlanta, at Denver, week 2, as you guys mentioned, and then the Chargers, the home opener in week 3. When I had written my post, I think on Monday, Tuesday, about the top most intriguing potential week 1 matchups, I think I had Denver number 1, Atlanta was in the top 5, the Chargers were in the top 5. So you're seeing that all essentially out of the gate within the first month. That is a 1:00 game Sunday against Atlanta, September 8th, by the way, just to put the date and time on that one. Also, you even have the Mike Tomlin, Raheem Morris storyline, which is not going to be the biggest storyline, but those guys are good friends. They coach together in Tampa Bay in the secondary, and Tomlin vouched for Morris to get a head coaching job, get another opportunity, and he got it with Atlanta. So that'll be another storyline to talk about. Looking at, and I'm not one that loves to, even though we all do it, analyze, will they win this game or lose this game? You're talking about week 15 in May, and so much can and will change from, here until that point. But just on paper, Pittsburgh, they're underdogs for this game. I think Atlanta's going to be a tough team. I think people are kind of just assuming, they'll probably beat the Falcons, and they certainly can win this game. But with Cousins and a good offense and some pieces defensively, Ross, what do you think just off the top here in terms of the winnability of this game?
Yeah, I think opening up on the road and you're talking about an offense that has a lot of kind of moving parts that are going to need to gel early in the season. You got some new offensive linemen that'll probably be starting right off the bat. Obviously, the change in quarterback, you got a whole new offensive system. Typically that's going to take the offense a little bit of time to gel. And so I think opening up on the road, and Kirk Cousins is a good quarterback in his own right. I mean, they have some adjustment to do on their side as well, obviously, with the new head coach and all that. But I think just because it's on the road and week one there, I think them being 2.5 point underdogs right now, I think that sounds about right. But it's definitely a winnable game.
And Kirk Cousins, by the way, on the schedule release show that aired Wednesday night, said he expects to play in week one, coming off that torn Achilles in late October with Minnesota last season. Joe, what are your thoughts, just kind of big picture on the Steelers-Falcons matchup?
Yeah, I mean, like Ross said, Falcons got to go through some adjustments too. They got a new offense. I think Zach Robinson, an offensive coordinator, with Raheem Morris at head coach, but they kind of have the pieces in place in offense. You talk Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, Drake London. That's some really impressive weapons there for Kirk Cousins. And you add Darnell Mooney to that mix as well. Defensively, AJ Terrell and Jesse Bates are kind of two guys in the secondary that can make plays and have made plays in the past. So it'll be interesting to see, how the Steelers come out. If they want to kind of lean on Russ, or if they're going to go to the run game. I think that the 2.5 point underdogs is probably right around where it should be, given that it's a road contest. I think the game's in Pittsburgh, you might be able to flip that line, but on the road, weapons that Atlanta has, it's going to be a tough game. It's one I think the Steelers definitely can win, but definitely wouldn't be pencil it in as a definite. This is a game that they have to have or should have sorted.
I would. Sure. You go ahead, Ross.
I would chime in and just say I was at the last Steelers-Falcons matchup there down in Atlanta, and it basically is a home game. I think it was probably about 65% Steelers fans, if not more. That might be generous to the Falcons there. So, yeah, I mean, that stadium, it's a dome. It's a really nice field. Should be packed with Steelers fans. So I don't know about the whole home field advantage thing, but yeah.
Yeah, and Pittsburgh was there, 2 years ago, won 1916, and even additional storylines. The Heywards going back to where they grew up, where their dad played for a couple of years, Ironhead, as a member of the Falcons in the 90s. And so a lot to talk about on that one. Yeah, I'm with Joe. Pittsburgh, certainly can win that game, no question about that one. I just think Atlanta's going to be a tough out. Their big hang-up last year was that just lack of quarterback play. They should have that with Kirk Cousins, assuming that he will be healthy and starting week one, which again, he says and expects he will be, with London and Pitts and Bijan in year two, and just a good coaching staff overall. Morris and Zach Robinson, who Pittsburgh wanted to interview, right? And never got the chance to interview Zach Robinson for their vacant OC position. So you throw that, and then obviously Arthur Smith returning to Atlanta. There'll be a lot to talk about in that one. Week 2 at Denver, Sunday, September 15th, 4:25 p.m. Eastern time. The matchup we thought could be the week 1, Denver playing Seattle in week 1. Pittsburgh will come to town in week number 2. Joe, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, obviously the biggest storyline is going to be Russ's return to Denver and Sean Payton after the two of them seemingly didn't get along at all last year. I think it's going to be interesting to see with Denver what they do at quarterback. Obviously, they have Zach Wilson. Bo Nix is there. I mean, there's been some speculation that they're just going to want to go with Nix. He's the rookie right off the bat. But then again, I think we had the early season schedule isn't really conducive to, him coming in, playing some tough defenses. Obviously, Pittsburgh's one of them. But I think something that, we're kind of overlooking a little bit too is playing in the elevation in Denver that early in the season. It's a tough place to play, no matter when. But, early in the season, I think definitely going to be a factor. Benefit to Pittsburgh, they have two, they can kind of ground and pound, try to win that way with two, strong running backs. And if Russ is starting, which I think we all assume he will be, he's done it before. It was his home field the last 2 years. So, but I mean, again, it's a game, given where the Broncos are, again, a game that the Steelers should win, but not one that I think you can definitely pencil it in. Being a road game, being in the elevation, and just like Sean Payton's gonna want to get his revenge on Russ after what happened last season. So definitely a lot of factors in that one. It's gonna be a lot of fun though. I'm looking forward to it.
Sure, the early season elevations are really good point, and even just playing at Denver in general has not been kind to Pittsburgh. I pulled up the numbers the other day. Pittsburgh is 1-6 at Denver in their last 7 contests, so it's just a difficult environment. And yeah, for a new team, a young team in a lot of ways to play in those elements in terms of the elevation will be a challenge. Ross, I know we can't be Broncos Depot here, and there's a lot we're going to have to watch and unknowns to talk about. But will Bo Nix start this game, or do you think they will go with a veteran?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, the Steelers, obviously, if a rookie quarterback starting, that plays pretty well into the Steelers' hands. I think Tomlin's record is 24-5, somewhere up in that range against rookie quarterbacks since 2007. Obviously, last year they dropped one to Stroud, and more recently that hasn't held up as well. But yeah, just watching Bo Nix at the Senior Bowl, I didn't get the impression that he's extremely pro ready. I was a little bit surprised he went as high as he did in the draft, but I mean they're ready to turn the next page there in Denver and start to figure out what they have. And I mean they're still cash strapped for a couple more years with Russell Wilson's contract, I think, hurting them both this year and next year. So why not try and figure out what they've got in their rookie? I think there's right now about a 51-49 that Bo Nix will be starting. And I think if he does start, the Steelers have a pretty good chance.
I'm more inclined to make more absolute predictions when it's not about the Steelers and they won't be used against me as much. I think you take it to the bank that Bo Nix is going to start this game week 2. I mean, Sean Payton was as high on Bo Nix as probably any coach was. And I think reporting was that the Broncos were one of the few teams, if not the only team, that had a first-round grade on him. Nix is 24 years old, I think, started a ton of games as he went from Auburn to Oregon. I think he had like 50 starts in his career. So he's got that experience and he's a really smart guy. I think Sean Payton's going to go with him out of the gate unless he just falls flat on his face in the preseason. So that'll be the game there. Obviously, again, yeah, Russell Wilson, going back to Denver is going to be the major storyline in that one, assuming that he does start. But another one where I think it's going to be close because Pittsburgh just plays close games in general. They never blow teams out and put teams away. I mean, it's so rare. And then at Denver against a team that still has some talent, I guess the question is, will Courtland Sutton be, which side will he be playing for in that week 2 game? Will he be playing for Denver? Could he potentially come to Pittsburgh? Another kind of layer to this whole conversation. Week number 3, Pittsburgh finally opens up at home, hosting the LA Chargers Sunday, September 22nd at 1 p.m. Eastern time. Ross, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, the Chargers should be, I mean, we're talking about Jim Harbaugh. We know his teams always come to play, and I think that they added some good pieces there in the draft. I think Justin Herbert's probably due to have another breakout season. It's been a couple years since he's still considered one of the top quarterbacks, but he hasn't totally lived up to that, especially from a win-loss standpoint. And I think the Chargers have a lot of pieces there to make that happen. I think this is the longest. I mean, obviously they're flying out from LA. This will be one of their longer trips of the year. And so that's a factor. The Steelers are favored in this game. This is one of the 6 games that the Steelers are favored in at the moment. I believe they're favored by 2. Hopefully by this point, after a couple games and after a couple being tested on the road, coming back home for the first game, I think Russell Wilson will hopefully, given that he is starting, which I expect he will still be starting at this point. I think hopefully the offense is starting to gel a little bit more by this point. It should be an interesting matchup, though, because you're probably going to need to score some points to be able to keep up with this. So this will be kind of the first, maybe Atlanta also tests them in this way, but this might be one of the first matchups where they really have to test that offense and put up, more than 24 points or so to walk out of there with a victory, and that'll be a good test for them.
Sure, that's fair. Joe, what impact do you think Harbaugh is going to have on a Chargers team that, struggled last year? Obviously, fired Brandon Staley, trying to, build up that defense some. How much of an impact do you think immediately Harbaugh can have?
I honestly think it's going to be huge. I mean, rookie is not going to have a huge impact. He brought in some guys from Michigan and who kind of embrace the system. I mean that's going to rub off on guys, and I think everybody in that organization is ready for a change after they went through the Staley last season. That game against the Raiders was just something else, something to behold at the end of the season. So I mean Herbert, I think he's ready. He's due for a breakout. Like Ross said, they brought in the two backs from Baltimore. Obviously, they had experience with John Harbaugh, so little, brother and Dobbins and Gus Edwards, two guys that have, they've had some success against Pittsburgh in the past. The one thing again about this Chargers team that I don't love is their receiving core. I think they're going to be relying pretty heavily on, Ladd McConkey and maybe Quentin Johnson, who was a disappointment as a rookie. Defensively, I like that they're able to bring back Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. Those are two guys that, were kind of rumored. Maybe they got to get traded. Maybe they got to get caught with, cap constraints. But I mean, I think Harbaugh, I mean, we saw what he did at Michigan. We saw what he did with the Niners all those years ago. I think he's a great coach. I think he's going to get, immediate buy-in. And I think, this Chargers team is going to be a pretty competitive team this year. Game being in Pittsburgh, I'd like to think, Steelers come away in the home opener, but Chargers are definitely, not an opponent to be overlooked at all this season.
Yeah, there's a Ravens flair to this team. Their GM Joe Ortiz was with Baltimore for a long time. You mentioned the running backs, the Harbaugh connections. They're going to be physical. I mean, I thought they would take a receiver at what the fifth overall pick, and they go Joe Alt, who's I assume going to play right tackle. You got him and Slater. I mean, they want to be physical. They want to run the ball with a good quarterback. They can be a dangerous team.
They're going to be attacking there on the defensive side of the ball. I think Bud Dupree obviously had spoken with the Steelers, and so we were tracking that storyline a little bit. He ended up going to the Chargers. And the main selling point reportedly was that they sold him on 3 edge rusher packages. So I don't know what that's going to look like, but you're going to have 3 pretty athletic edge rushers out on the field attacking the Steelers offense. You got Russell Wilson, who's took, I think, either the most or the second most, and Justin Fields was the other top of the sacks taken last year. So that's definitely something to monitor.
Yeah, you talk about the snap to throw times. It was Fields had the longest snap to throw time last year, and Wilson was second of qualifiers. I think technically Nick Mullins was above Wilson, but he only played a couple of games. So, that's going to be tested a lot. Troy Fautanu, if he's the right tackle, if Bosa's healthy, then you're going to see him. And of course, Mack on the other side. Those are going to be some of the key matchups in this game. And then Derwin James at safety, whenever, again, he's healthy, one of the best, strong safeties in football. So, again, all winnable games to start, but challenging in their own right. I don't really see comparatively the front half of the schedule might look easier than the back half, and it probably is. But to me, there is no, easy is a relative term. Every game in the NFL is difficult, but even just understanding that these are all, I think, challenging, competitive teams this year. Week 4 at the Colts, Sunday, September 29th, a 1 p.m. Eastern time game. Saw Colts blow out Pittsburgh last year, run all over them. That was one of the worst losses, but really their whole 3-game losing streak was ugly across the board. Anthony Richardson should be healthy in this one. Joe, just kind of give me your thoughts on this matchup.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how Richardson looks. Obviously missed most of last season with the shoulder injury, but when he played, he was pretty impressive as a rookie. He can hurt you with his arm and his legs. And I mean, the Colts are just a solid team. I mean, Jonathan Taylor, we saw what the backup Colts running backs did against Pittsburgh last season, and they brought back Pittman this offseason, added A.D. Mitchell, who's a guy I'm pretty high on in the draft. And, they have a really solid defense, pretty underrated. Just their team, I mean, they're going to win a lot of games this season. I think they're probably, 9, 10, maybe 11 win team. Obviously, Pittsburgh on the road again last year was not favorable to them, as we talked about. I think it's going to be a tough one. So, we look, and I know you wrote about it, like this early season slate is not going to be a cakewalk, and that's when we get into the back half, it's going to be something that could really hurt them if they drop 3 or 4 games before they get into the divisional play. And this Colts game is one that I think right now I'd probably have pegged as a loss. Just a really talented team. Pittsburgh headed into the road. I mean, I might be higher on the Colts than some, but I just love the roster that they've constructed. Chris Ballard, I think, is one of the best GMs in football, and they put the hurting on Pittsburgh last year. And I wouldn't be surprised if Richardson kind of broke out early this season, became one of the better quarterbacks in the league, and I could see him, doing some damage against the Steelers this year.
Yeah, Ross, I think just big picture. I mean, I want to get your thoughts on the Colts too, but Atlanta, that's a playoff team. Denver, probably not a playoff team, but we'll see how Sean Payton, works things in year two. The Chargers, they're going to be a wild card potential team. The Colts, again, probably wild card team because the Texans probably win the South there, but that's why I say it's not a cakewalk. I mean, I read about that. Joe mentioned that. I mean, these are, at minimum, I think 3 of your first 4 teams are playoff caliber.
Yeah, I think the level of quarterbacks they're going to play pretty much the entire season. I think Bo Nix is in week 2 will be one of the easier ones, and Anthony Richardson's plenty talented. He's also one of the quote unquote easier ones, but that's just because there's so many good quarterbacks that they're going to be playing this year. I do think that last year's game has me scarred a little bit in terms of the Colts and their team makeup and how they match up with the Steelers. Obviously, it was late in the season. The Steelers had a lot of injuries at that point at inside linebacker and at safety. A lot of that had already started to take hold. DeMonte Casey got ejected from this game and left the Steelers even more thin. I believe at that point they had already started 4 or 5 different safeties and probably 4 inside linebackers. So there's reason to be obviously more optimistic defensively matching up with them this time. They're much better set up with Patrick Queen. Hopefully by this point, Peyton Wilson's starting to work into the mix. You got a Landon Roberts. We don't know what Cole Holcomb's doing, but the safety position's much more stable. So kind of up the spine of the defense, which obviously helps support against the run game that ran all over the Steelers last year. It should be a much better situation this time around.
Yeah, I mean, that was the game where Patrick Peterson first moved to safety, right after, because Minka got hurt in that game too. Wasn't that one play after Casey got tossed that Minka went down, and they had to? That's when they moved Peterson back, and you saw Trenton Thompson come in, and all the inside linebackers got hurt. So Pittsburgh, optimistically, will be better equipped to stop the run. But just knowing Richardson and knowing where the Colts, just kind of compete level is at, gives them a chance. Just to kind of take a pause from the schedule, since you mentioned it, Dave and I think we briefly had this conversation on, I don't know, whatever day it is, Wednesday show. Peyton Wilson. Again, obviously for all these rookies, you got to get these guys in the OTAs, and we'll get eyes on them in training camp, the preseason. I wonder, what do you guys think the role Wilson will have as a rookie? Is it going to be purely backup, special teams? Is there a way he could try to filter in defensively? Joe, I'll start with you. Just curious. I know we're all kind of in wait and see mode. How do you envision Pittsburgh handling their, inside linebacker room in terms of playing time this year?
Yeah, and I know the Steelers have been cautious with their rookies in the past, but we saw last year when they had Holcomb, Roberts, and Alexander, they kind of cycled the 3 through to start the year. And I think Wilson will start as, that third guy, and I would not be surprised at all if they kind of had that same sort of inside linebacker rotation. Assuming Holcomb, it doesn't look like he's going to be healthy for the start of the season. So you're really looking at, you have Patrick Queen, you have Roberts, and you have Wilson, and then Mark Robinson's kind of like, maybe that fourth guy in the mix. I think Wilson's probably going to play, pretty significant snaps early on. I think I'll start off behind Roberts as the number 2. I wouldn't be surprised throughout the course of the season if maybe he passed him. But Roberts was really solid last season, so I wouldn't really say that he's going to lose his job. But I think Wilson's going to play a lot. I would not be surprised at all to see him, week 1 play some decent amount of defensive snaps.
Ross, where do you come in? Do you think he'll play a lot like what Joe thinks, or do you think it'll be a more slow play type of role with him?
Yeah, I mean, last year in the 3-man rotation, it looks like Landon Roberts was stepping in and playing, 20, 25, 30 snaps, that kind of range early in the season. I don't know if Peyton Wilson will be playing that much, but maybe we can expect, hopefully by week 4 or 5, hopefully he's starting to play about 15 snaps a game or so. I think that'd be a good spot. I mean, I think he's pretty pro ready in terms of just his experience in college. I mean, obviously winning both of the significant defensive awards, and Defensive Player of the Year and the Linebacker of the Year, Butkus and Bednarik. So I think he's ready to contribute. And if the Steelers believe what apparently the rest of the league believed in terms of his he's a one contract player. They have every reason to want to get him on the field immediately and start contributing to get the most out of that one contract if that does end up being the case. But I think maybe 10, 15 snaps a game by that point in the season would be realistic.
I just wonder how they'll come. I think he'll play defensively. I just wonder what packages. I mean, because the rotation they had last year was Roberts playing a lot of base when that group was healthy with Holcomb, Alexander, and Roberts. They enjoyed and they really valued that 3-man rotation. I think they want to use it this year. I think it's one reason why they went out there and drafted Peyton Wilson and took such a long look at inside linebackers. Obviously, the Holcomb injury also complicated things. I told Dave I think maybe some nickel stuff with Wilson. Maybe he'll sub in with Roberts and nickel every third series, something like that. I mean, I think in your base 3-4, it's going to be Queen and Roberts primarily. Dime, obviously, it's going to be Queen as your all situations, every down backer. So maybe nickel, there's an opportunity for him to get some snaps. Probably still slow play him early, the way they did Porter last year. Although Wilson, I think probably a bit more NFL ready than maybe where Porter was exactly at last year. So we'll see. I just want to get your thoughts on that. I think he will play. I just wonder in terms of the packages and how they'll work that rotation. All right, back to the schedule here. Week 5, a pretty marquee matchup. The first primetime game for Pittsburgh, Sunday Night Football at home versus the Dallas Cowboys. Earliest Pittsburgh has played Dallas since 1997 when they both opened the season against each other. Dallas winning that one in blowout fashion, 37-7. Ross, I'll start with you. Just your thoughts here on this matchup. This should be a fun game.
Yeah, it should be interesting. I think last time the Steelers and Cowboys played each other and Ezekiel Elliott was on the roster, it was that crazy game where it was back and forth in the last 2 minutes, and the Cowboys ultimately walked away with that one. The Steelers had some kind of fake spike or something. That was the fake spike
to AB, yeah, from Ben to AB.
So
and then Jarvis Jones could not stay in this gap, and Zeke ran through it. Yeah.
Right. Obviously it's a much different team from then. The Cowboys have had some attrition along the offensive line. They sent away the Tyron Smith signed with the Jets this year. They lost Tyler Biadasz in free agency, and so they're going to be relying on some new pieces. I think Tyler Guyton, who a lot of people expected to maybe play right tackle, they're grooming him to play left tackle. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how their offensive line is which kind of personnel they use along their offensive line and how well they do. I mean, Tyler Guyton's along with some of the other tackles who didn't have a ton of experience. I think he's pretty raw. I mean, he was playing H-back or tight end just a few years ago in college. And so that's going to be an opportunity for somebody like Alex Highsmith to hopefully feast. It'll be an interesting test for him to go against Highsmith. I think they're probably not going to have the type of running success that they've had in recent years. I mean, really ever since Zeke left last time, and then they kind of tried to feature Pollard, who's now also no longer on the team. Their rushing success just wasn't that great last year. Now they have CeeDee Lamb, they have Dak Prescott, and so that's obviously a threat. They did lose some of their supporting receiver cast, so they're kind of in a somewhat similar position in terms of their receiving core as the Steelers, with losing some of their wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 types this offseason. So, I mean, what's the line? It looks like the Cowboys are favored by 1.5. It's probably about right. I think the Cowboys should probably be slightly favored. They've been more successful the last few years than the Steelers have.
You talk about individual matchups. Porter on CeeDee Lamb is what I'm going to be certainly circling for this one. Joe, let me ask you a different kind of question with this game. Which team do you think is under more pressure this year to win, Dallas or Pittsburgh?
That's a really tough question. And I think right now I'd go with Pittsburgh just because of what they did this offseason. I mean, Jerry Jones said, the Cowboys are going all in. Well, if going all in involves just adding Eric Kendricks, then yeah, they went all in. The Steelers, I think, really made it known that they want to win. Obviously, they revamped the quarterback room. They added Patrick Queen. They took Troy Fautanu in the first round and Zach Frazier to kind of rebuild that offensive line. They made the moves that they needed to make them a contender. So I think given what they did, that pressure is kind of more there. Like, hey, we're putting the product on the field now. Now you got to go and win. Cowboys didn't really do anything. I mean, they have pieces. They're a talented roster, but they didn't really add to it. I mean, they brought back Zeke. I think they didn't even give Derrick Henry a call. I know they're right up against the cap, but there was still definitely room for them to add, and they didn't really do anything. So, kind of expecting them to be any different than they have been the past few years is kind of hard to do given the moves they made. And whereas the Steelers completely, revamped their roster and made a point that they want to win now and that they're getting impatient. So I would say that the pressure is probably more in Pittsburgh going into the season.
Yeah, they didn't even draft a running back. I thought that was a weird strategy to not even draft one and then go bring back Zeke as if that was going to solve all of your problems. Yeah, I think internally, Pittsburgh certainly feels the pressure. I still think Dallas probably under the most pressure, because of just the national coverage they get. But you're also, Mike McCarthy. If this does not go well this year, he's not coming back. And Dak, last year of his deal. Little uncertain future there. Probably still some more pressure on Dallas, I would say, but I think both teams will be feeling it, and this one will be highly covered for that reason. Ross, any other thoughts here? Maybe your thoughts on who's under more pressure this year, Pittsburgh or Dallas?
Yeah, I think Dallas is my answer there, just because you're in a situation where you're trying to figure out if you're going to extend Dak, and one of my good buddies is a Cowboys fan. They're very down on Dak, which is surprising to me. And it kind of seems like the Cowboys faithful are very down on the team overall after the way that they bounced from the playoffs last year. One interesting thing to watch, and I think they probably should have, that Maris, I don't know how to say his last name, Leofau or whatever, from Notre Dame starting. They drafted him over somebody like Peyton Wilson. So I'm kind of hoping to see both of those guys out on the field and for the Steelers to prove why the Cowboys were wrong to pass on Peyton Wilson. Obviously, they have a history with injury-prone linebackers, which I get. They probably were shy to go back to that well, but it should be an interesting little rookie mini matchup to watch there.
Yeah, I like that. I think, not that, again, I don't consider any NFL game, especially when it's Pittsburgh, easy. It's all close. It's all competitive. There's one, I think, maybe just, I guess you could say, forgiving, for lack of a better word, portion of the schedule. It's that week 6 through week 10. I think the beginning's tough. I think the end is certainly difficult. I think the middle of week 6 at the Raiders, week 7 versus the Jets, week 8 versus the Giants, the bye week 9, and then week 10 at Washington to play the Commanders. That is maybe the easiest slice of the schedule. Looking at week 6, though, at Las Vegas, Pittsburgh will have to travel. I know that the Raiders, responded well to Antonio Pierce. Their just quarterback situation is so unknown, and I could not tell you who's going to be their starting quarterback week 6. I don't even know who's going to start week 1 for them. Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, who knows what else, they may, what their decision may end up being. So, Joe, I'll start with you to kind of get your thoughts on the Steelers-Raiders matchup. That's Sunday at 4:05, by the way.
Yeah, so I just wrote about this one in my article I'm working on about the games that can make or break this season. You look at it, it's week 6, it's sandwiched between 2 Sunday night primetime games. It's a road trip. It kind of has trap game written on it. Pittsburgh's they won in Las Vegas last year, but the Raiders, their roster's not great. But Minshew, he was the quarterback for the Colts last year, and they beat Pittsburgh if he's starting. O'Connell had some flashes last year. I wasn't super impressed with him, but this is a team that played really hard under Antonio Pierce last season. They got the most out of their talent. There's a reason they brought him on full time. They lost Josh Jacobs. The running back room, I think, is Zamir White and Alexander Madison. They still have Devontae Adams. Defense, Max Crosby's a game changer. But again, it's a game the Steelers really should win. It's a game they can't overlook. The Jets week 7 will be a tough game. We just talked about the Cowboys will be a tough game. So this is one they kind of have to have in that stretch. Road trip, but Pittsburgh took over Allegiant Stadium last year, and would not be surprised to see do it again. I know you wrote it's the hottest ticket out there right now. So Steelers fans are definitely flocking to that one. So yeah, Raiders not great on paper. I think they'll play better than they kind of look right now, but it's a game that I think the Steelers should definitely win. Russ has experience playing the Raiders twice a year when he was in Denver. So interesting matchup. One that might be harder than it looks, but one that I think the Steelers should take.
Yeah, I think Pittsburgh should be the favorite. Should be a game they quote unquote should win, but the Raiders I think will be tough in terms of the mentality of Pierce and how this team will respond. They're going to respond to him and did respond better to him than they did under Josh McDaniels. Ross, your take on this game?
I was at this game as well last year, and it was very walking over the bridge there from the casinos. A lot of Steelers fans. I think it was another kind of 60 or 70% Steelers fans slant there. I was just looking up the Broncos Raiders kind of recent history to see if Russell Wilson had beat the Raiders, and it looks like he may have lost 4 straight against them. So I don't know if he was actually
he didn't beat them in his 2 years.
If I'm reading this right.
That's interesting. I believe you.
Yeah, so that's something to watch. Not a whole lot of success, even though he has experience against them.
Did he play well in those games? Did they lose for other reasons? Do you have any of the numbers in terms of just how he specifically did it? I know we're not watching the tape and we're just kind of going off of whatever box score there might be, but I'm just curious to see what those results were.
Yeah, the website I have up doesn't have that kind of detail, but this sounds like a good article waiting to happen here. So yeah, I mean, that's something to watch, certainly. And then, I mean, their quarterback situation, their running back situation, I'm not a huge fan of either of those right now. I think Gardner Minshew will probably be the starter. And Gardner, I think he passed for 215 yards and 3 touchdowns against the Steelers last season. So he had some success there. I mean, 3 touchdowns, that's something that the Steelers would have loved to see from any of their quarterbacks last season. I do think he'll probably be starting there. In terms of another interesting thing to watch, we will get to see Jackson Powers-Johnson, the apple of Pittsburgh's eye in the pre-draft process. We'll get to see him at guard. They drafted him, and they already kind of signed Andre James at center. So we'll get to see Powers-Johnson and how he holds up at guard, and that should be an interesting thing. Obviously, Max Crosby is going to be in the mix more than likely for Defensive Player of the Year. Some of those early odds were released, and TJ Watt and Max Crosby, I think, were tied for second, along with some other names for kind of the early favorites for that award. Obviously, no snap's been played. Who knows what's going to happen, but they have some impact players on that side of the ball. It was what was the score of that game last year with the Steelers and Raiders?
Pittsburgh won it was 1 possession. That was the Levi Wallace multi-interception where they picked off Garoppolo 3 times. After it was 23 to 17, 23-18, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I could see something somewhat similar playing out in Vegas this time around as well. I think a nice close game, but the Steelers, I think, are probably a little bit more complete of a roster at this point. The Raiders have some pretty significant questions at some of their main positions on offense.
Looks like last year Russell Wilson did not play in the finale. He was benched at that point, and that was a loss, but Wilson did not start. That was what Stidham getting the nod there in week 1 to open the year. They lost 17-16. Wilson completed 80% of his passes, only for 177 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. And then in 2022, started both games, lost in week 4, 32-23. Threw 2 touchdowns, no picks. And then week 11 lost 22-16, no touchdowns, no picks. So eyeballing it, you're not watching the tape. The numbers didn't look terrible, but Wilson certainly wasn't great. And it's notable he lost the 3 starts he made against the Raiders in his Broncos tenure. So interesting nugget there. All right, week 7, that'll be another Sunday night primetime game at home against the Jets, October 20th. Presumably, Aaron Rodgers playing in this one. Ross, I'll stick with you. Your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to make for a good matchup too. Potential, I guess, definitely Aaron Rodgers Hall of Fame, and Russell Wilson's kind of on the cusp. So anytime you got 2 guys who are, potentially Hall of Famers playing against each other, that's going to be a good matchup. And I think both of them are going to have every reason to want to come and play on that primetime matchup. I know the Jets have 6 of them, which is crazy. But Aaron Rodgers is definitely going to want to make the most of those national spotlights after missing all last year. Russell Wilson is going to obviously want to make the most of his, just trying to keep his job and like I said, try to work his way back into the Hall of Fame conversation if he isn't in it right now. I think overall the Jets, I mean, last year was rough, but you can't fault them too much. They didn't really have a quarterback, and they were relying on, Zach Wilson and these kinds of guys for a significant portion of the season. I do think in terms of some of the matchups, I mean, they have some good receivers on that side, and the Steelers have some questions in their cornerback kind of depth. So that could be something that hurts them. I mean, Joey Porter Jr. matching up on, whether it's probably Garrett Wilson. But then, beyond that, it's going to be a little interesting. They got, who did they draft this year? They had Corley. Yeah. So, I mean, talking about a slot receiver, and the Steelers don't really have a slot corner, and Corley's a guy who can break a lot of tackles and create yardage. Who are the Steelers going to have to match up with that and make sure they can get him on the ground if they're trying a lot of these, passing behind the line of scrimmage stuff, and just let Corley run with it. That's something interesting to watch. I think the corner receiver matchups. I mean, Porter on Wilson, I assume he's going to shadow. They signed Mike Williams, who Pittsburgh was targeting, I think, and hope to sign, and the Jets, signed him as they brought him in for a visit. And the other side, you got Pickens and Sauce Gardner, which I think will be a fun, loud matchup there. Yeah, that should definitely be a good test for Pickens. And if the Steelers don't add a significant playmaker at wide receiver, Pickens is going to be receiving more than just Sauce, probably, in terms of attention. And hopefully by this point of the year, he's been able to make the most of working against those double teams. But this could be a matchup where he starts to show some of that frustration, especially going up somebody the caliber of Sauce.
Yeah. Joe, your thoughts on Week 7 against the Jets?
Yeah, I really like what the Jets did this offseason, kind of beefing up that offensive line. Tyron Smith, John Simpson, they drafted Fashanu. Who knows if he'll be a day one starter, because they got Morgan Moses as well. I mean, their offense is so talented. Breece Hall, when he's healthy, he's so fun to watch. He's such a talented running back and run through tackles. He's fast. And then we'll see what Rodgers can do. I mean, he missed all last season. It's a little bit of a question mark. He's a little bit older, coming off an Achilles. It's not an easy injury to recover from. I mean, he had his unconventional recovery methods. He was just thinking about coming back late last season. So maybe he'll be back, and he'll be the MVP caliber quarterback he has been. And he's certainly got the weapons around him. I mean, we talked about Williams, Corley, Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson, I think, is going to be due for a huge season. He put up numbers last season with Zach Wilson at quarterback. So really, really talented team. It's going to be a dogfight, I think. Acrisure Stadium, Sunday Night Football, it's going to be loud. Hopefully, by then, maybe the Steelers come with some momentum if they beat the Raiders. But definitely going to be another one of those games. It's going to be a close matchup. Jets are going to be contending for the AFC East this season. They're a really solid team. So it's going to be a fun one to watch. Going to be close.
Yeah, I think Pittsburgh maybe just a bit stronger in the trenches. At least hopefully they will be. I know, Joe mentioned, the Jets have made an effort to improve their tackle play, which was a real issue last year with Smith, and they draft Bashanu, trade down a spot and still get him. I just think Pittsburgh a little bit tougher up front, but that'll be one of the key areas to watch, in addition to that secondary, corner receiver play. Week 8 against the Giants, the first Monday night game. So you go from Sunday night to Monday night on October 28th, again against the Giants. A little unclear with the quarterback situation. I guess it'll be Daniel Jones. There's some uncertainty about just, will he be benched by then, his health, all that kind of stuff. But Joe, I'll stick with you. Your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, honestly, the Giants, the quarterback situation, I'm just not in love with their weapons. I mean, Daniel Jones might be Drew Lock by then, which, again, not all that exciting. They lost Saquon Singletary, who just kind of feels like a meh kind of replacement there. So I think Pittsburgh's defense can kind of be an advantage in this one. I think they can get some pressure. I mean, the Giants' offensive line's had their struggles the last few years. I mean, Andrew Thomas is a stud at left tackle, but around him there's not much. I know they brought in, I think, John Runyon this offseason from Green Bay, but I think Pittsburgh's defense is going to be able to overwhelm the Giants in this match. This is kind of one that this might be the game I'm most confident in the first, 8 games of the season. The Giants, they might be okay. They play hard under Brian Dable, but not really a team that scares me all that much.
Yeah, secondary looks a little weak for the Giants, but can their pass rush make up for it? You got 2 stud edge guys in Thibodeau, and they trade for Brian Burns, get a great deal from him from Carolina. Pittsburgh has invested in their O-line for games like this, when can your tackles come in and be able to mitigate Burns and Thibodeau, when you know that, Wilson or Fields, those are guys that like to move the pocket and escape and hold on to the football. Kind of need some tackles who can protect. So, Ross, what's your take?
Yeah, I think I mean, they added, we haven't talked about Malik Neighbors. He's obviously, some people had him as the, I guess, top receiver, even though Marvin Harrison Jr., a lot of people thought he was the top receiver. Some people did favor Malik Neighbors in that conversation, and I think rightfully so. He's a very talented individual. I don't know, if they have a quarterback who's going to be able to maximize him necessarily, but that'll be something to watch. And maybe an interesting matchup there for Joey Porter Jr. as well. In terms of the defense, I mean, they do have the secondary is maybe not their strong suit, but they do have some young guys on there. They drafted the first, I believe, the first safety off the board in Nubin this year, and then Deontay Banks is a young guy as well. So there's reason that to believe that their secondary could be a little better than maybe anticipated, but obviously the Steelers don't have the receiving weapons to really threaten that anyways. So at least as we sit here right now. So this is probably the Steelers' easiest matchup on the schedule. This is the one that they're most favored in right now, favored by 4. I question why it's on Monday Night Football. I mean, it is 2 big markets in terms of supporting their teams, and the Steelers and the Giants, but maybe not the most intriguing Monday night matchup. Yeah. And obviously Mike Tomlin does a nice job on Monday Night Football. So lot to like for the Steelers here.
Good point there. The Giants, though, I will say that they're a fast receiver group with Neighbors, with Slayton, assuming he's still with the team, and Jalen Hyatt, who made big plays last year. There is some speed. And so does Pittsburgh have the speed to match with their secondary? Yeah, Dante Jackson, who certainly can fly. That's going to be important. I think this, defense, the secondary got a bit younger, but faster overall, but still maybe looking for some extra pieces, especially in that slot corner role. But the Giants do have some, I think, big playability on offense. That leads us to the Week 9 bye, which Pittsburgh's bye week is it's never late. I think I had the last time Pittsburgh has had a Week 10 and beyond bye was 2015 or so. Last year it was Week 6 this year a little later, but Week 9. That's fine by me to have that right there in the middle. Coming out of the bye, Week 10 at Washington, November 10th, 1 p.m. Eastern time. We'll see what Jaden Daniels looks like and this new look regime with Adam Peters and Dan Quinn. Commanders not expected to be a heavyweight, obviously, but if Jaden Daniels is a CJ Stroud type of guy, we know how much a quarterback can change the complexion of a team. So, Joe, I'll go back to you, kind of your thoughts on this one.
Yeah. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's going to really depend on what Daniels looks like. I think the Commanders, made some solid moves this offseason. Bobby Wagner wasn't great last season, but he's a veteran and can kind of lead the defense. And I really like the Brian Frankie Louvu from Carolina. Drafted Mike Sanders still pretty early to play that slot corner role. Their cornerback room was kind of a mess last season. We'll see if Emmanuel Forbes can take a leap. I know Joey Porter Jr. was talking some trash with him on Instagram yesterday, but he had an up and down rookie season. But a receiver, I mean, Jahan Dotson had some moments last season. Terry McLaurin's obviously very talented, and they got Biotish from Dallas to kind of solidify their offensive line. They signed Zach Ertz. So if Daniels can kind of, to have a Stroud or even maybe a step a small step below as a rookie, the Commanders could be competitive team. They added Austin Eckler too, receiving back there to go along with Brian Robinson. So again, a game that we can't really say in May how it's going to look because we don't know if Jaden Daniels is going to be really talented as a rookie or if he's going to go through some growing pains. I mean, he's an older prospect. He played a ton of ball in college, but you don't know until they step on the field. So as of now, it looks like a game that the Steelers should definitely win, but Commanders are a talented team, or could be a talented team if Daniels can, really be that guy for them.
And they have a strong D-line, so Pittsburgh will have to win the point of attack, the line of scrimmage, run the ball well. I mean, Washington's D-line, they've got a bunch of pedigree guys. They draft Johnny Newton, who is already having a second surgery. Who knows what his rookie impact will be, but still, even without him, it's a good D-line. Ross, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think in terms of their core of offensive weapons, they've got a really nice stable as we sit here right now. I mean, obviously a lot of that's going to depend on the performance of Daniels. I think he, has the potential to be kind of like Anthony Richardson last year before he got hurt. Impressed with his athleticism and his arm. The one thing with Jaden Daniels, just watching him in the pre-draft process, the guy does not know how to protect himself. He takes some of the biggest hits you'll ever see when he's scrambling. And so, I mean, the Steelers defense seems to be well equipped to punish that if he decides he wants to take off running a bunch. I mean, they got some guys who can fly at inside linebacker now and keep up with them. And, obviously Minkah Fitzpatrick and some of the safeties roaming around, Deshaun Elliott. But in terms of their weapons that they have, McLaurin, Eckler, Dotson, McCaffrey, I mean, they got Zach Ertz, they drafted Ben Sinnott. I think they've got a lot to like in terms of their weapons on offense. And then they have some young guys, or one young guy at least along the offensive line that I'm excited about, and Brandon Coleman. It'll be interesting to see, where he's at this point in the season. I would assume, just given what else they have along the offensive line, Coleman will probably be starting by that point. I'm not sure which side or at what position. I think he could play guard or tackle, but they added Tyler Biadasz, and so their offensive line's a little upgraded. So on offense, I think that they have a lot of pieces to be a much better team this year. It'll be interesting to see to what extent that gels and comes together.
Right.
And then on defense, I mean, reuniting Bobby Wagner with Dan Quinn from their days in Seattle. I think that was one of Quinn's, kind of favorite linebackers when he was there years ago, during the Legion of Boom days of the Seattle defense. He was kind of a centerpiece of that. And so I think he'll lean on Wagner to kind of make sure that the defense is, well communicated and in the right spot. And then, you got that Dante Fowler and Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen and some of these guys to contend with up front. And so that's going to be a good test for the Steelers' young offensive line. And hopefully by this point in the season, they're starting to gel a little bit.
Yeah, no, I agree there. I think the Commanders have some pieces. Can they put it together? Year one, the Dan Quinn hire was, I think, viewed as questionable, a little surprising by some in the media, but who knows how things will look by week 10. Before we get into that week 11 through 18 gauntlet, I don't know if you guys are paying attention. It's recording this. It's 10:53 a.m. The College Football 25 trailer comes out in 7 minutes, and I want to see that one so bad. I don't know if you guys are excited for the new college football video game that comes out in July, but I cannot wait to see what this trailer looks like. I'm optimistic, a little nervous given the whole Madden pedigree and how poorly that's gone, but I'm definitely buying this game.
I'm so excited.
I haven't tracked with that too much, but what's are the players being paid, or how's this work with the NIL and everything?
Yeah, you can opt in. I think 12,000 players did, and what do you get, Joe? You get a copy of the game and a couple some money.
You get a copy of the game and $500.
$500. Yeah, wow. And so not everyone did. Arch Manning did not opt in, so you can't use him. And they claim there's going to be, no way to basically replicate his likeness, which was the issue with the old NCAA games. I don't know, but Joe, what team are you going to start your dynasty with? I feel like you're a dynasty guy that takes like a 1-star, tries to bring them all the way to national glory.
I'm a huge dynasty guy. I just started actually way back. I went back to NCAA 11 for Road to Glory to import back into Madden 11. But dynasty is my jam. I think I'm going to start with Temple because one of my old college roommates, huge Temple fan, diehard Temple fan. Fallen on some hard times lately in the AAC. There's just not a lot of talent there. You kind of got that conference pedigree. You can recruit the Philadelphia hotbed. So it's definitely a program that you can kind of maybe flip and turn around pretty quickly. That just hasn't been very good lately. And I think it'll be a fun and interesting challenge.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'll have to think. I don't know. Idaho's not going to be in this game, which to my chagrin, since they're no longer FBS. So I'm not sure who I'm going to start with, but I want to see the trailer and hopefully it's going to look good. All right. Anyway, quick sidebar there. Let me just read through the week 11 through 18 slate or gauntlets, the better way to describe it. Then we'll kind of break things down one by one. But your first AFC North game does not come until week 11. It is the latest in Steelers history that they will start playing divisional foes. Week 11 versus Baltimore. Week 12 at Cleveland, short week, Thursday night game. Week 13 at Cincinnati, that's December 1st. Week 14 back to the Browns, that's the home game. So you got 4 straight AFC North games: Ravens, Browns, Bengals, Browns. Then week 15 at Philadelphia. Week 16, a Saturday game, that's the 21st at 4:30 at Baltimore. Then week 17, Christmas Day, classic Wednesday kickoff, 1 p.m. Eastern time, and then finishing things up at home against the Bengals, the day and time to be determined there. So Ravens, Browns, Bengals, Browns, Eagles, Ravens, Chiefs, Bengals. That is on paper, and who knows what the NFL world will look like by week 11 through 18. That is a difficult stretch to say the least. So Ross, I'll ask you, just Your thoughts on this team not even beginning a single AFC North game until week 11?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's generally not the most friendly final stretch of the schedule, but if there's anything to like, it's the fact that the Steelers are going to have plenty of time to gel on offense with all the moving parts I talked about earlier. You're going to have, hopefully by that point, the offensive line starting to kick in as roughly when they started to kind of round into form last year. You insert Broderick Jones, what was it, week 9 or week 10 or something like that
Titans
last
game.
year. Yeah, and so they started to gel at that point last year. Hopefully they're starting to gel by this point in 2024. And so I think there's some positives in terms of the Steelers are probably going to have their most competitive team on the field during that stretch, as opposed to if they played some of these guys early in the season, it might have been a little bit of a struggle. The other kind of big thing that stuck out to me is the Steelers having 2 short weeks with just 3 days rest. Obviously, there's the just normal Thursday night football game against the Browns. Obviously, there's 3 days rest there, but then they have the Christmas Day game. They'll play on Saturday before that, so they'll have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, another 3-day rest there. And both of those 2 periods are preceded by matchups against the Ravens. So the Steelers are going to be playing their most physical rivalry game and then heading into a short week to play on, some of these. I think that the Chiefs on Christmas Day, and then who's after the Ravens the first time? That's the Browns, I think.
Yeah, Ravens, Browns on that Thursday night game, the first time, week 11 to week 12.
Yeah, so that's probably the toughest quirk in the schedule in my eyes. The fact that you're going to have to play the Ravens before entering both short weeks, and we know how beat up the teams can get after those Ravens Steelers matchups.
It's a great point, Joe. What are your thoughts? Because I know some have said, I think including our own Matthew Marksy, that playing AFC North late in the season is actually a good thing. It's better to wait, and as Ross said, you kind of gel, and then you go through that stretch. And Pittsburgh has, to their credit, been very successful against the North. They had Lamar Jackson and Baltimore's number overall. They've been the best team playing the AFC North of any of the group. Since I think 2020 was some of the numbers that Warren Sharp posted. So is this a good thing for Pittsburgh to not begin their AFC North slate until so late in the season?
I don't really love it personally. I do think, maybe you can gel, and I know I like the idea that you play them all late. You really can control your own destiny. Those games you have to win, and they're all in short order. But just the physicality of AFC North football, especially as Ross said, you play on the Ravens and then you go on those short weeks. It's just so physical, and you're playing them all. I mean, you got the 4 in a row. It's going to take a toll. And by the end of that, that week 11 to 14 stretch, this team's going to be tired. They got a short week in there. You're playing divisional opponents. So I don't really love it the way it's all structured out. And then what I really don't love is that your 2 non-divisional opponents are, the Chiefs, a team that has had their number lately, and the Steelers have struggled in Philadelphia lately. So you're not getting any break when you're not in those divisional contests. So I'm not a huge fan of how that, aligned for the Steelers. So, I mean, we'll see. Maybe it will work out. I'd love to be proven wrong, but I think it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the value in playing those games late and how that could benefit Pittsburgh, but all of them, just, to run that Ravens, Browns, Bengals, Browns, I mean, it's just so physical. It's going to take its toll. And with the short weeks, and it's a short week for both sides, for Cleveland in week 12, for the Chiefs in week 17, but it just feels pretty heavy overall to be, pretty gassed down the stretch. So we'll see. I mean, obviously, I think making predictions about what the world looks like in, week 14, week 16 is going to be tough to do. But I imagine as long as the Chiefs have Mahomes, they're going to be pretty good, week 17, regardless of what happens around him. Ross, do you like the Christmas Day game overall from a fan perspective, from an analyst perspective? The NFL really pushing hard here to play this Christmas Day game. That's why Pittsburgh's playing on Saturday. All the Christmas Day teams are going to play Saturday, so it is still the same, off day number as it would be for the Sunday to Thursday. But what are your thoughts? You're just playing on the holiday in general.
I think I mean I like it. I like watching football on the holidays. I maybe could do without Wednesday football. It's kind of a weird setup, but I would have liked it a whole lot more if it wasn't against the reigning Super Bowl champs, because it's going to be a tough game, and I'd hate to have Christmas ruined for all the Pittsburgh people on on Christmas Day there against the Chiefs. But I think overall it's going to be a well-watched game. I think the NFL said that they put it in that time slot so that they could pull in more of an international audience as well, which is an interesting point. I think they may have considered them for the later slot, but wanted them in that slot so they could pull in the international audience. And so, I think it's going to be a heavily watched game. It's going to be, hopefully at this point in the season, the Steelers are still kind of hanging around in terms of their record, and they can hopefully have a lot to play for. I don't know if the Chiefs will have a lot to play for. That'll be something interesting to watch at this point in the season. It's week 17, and right? So it's
they probably would, because with the parity in the NFL, usually by week 17, most teams haven't locked up the 1 seed, for example. So I think week 18 will be a different story as it was with the Ravens last year. I think with the Chiefs, they'll probably have something on the line.
Yeah, if the Steelers beat the Ravens twice there, that might help the case for putting the Chiefs, maybe some of their guys on the bench resting. If the Steelers can knock off the Ravens a couple times leading up to this. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. But yeah, I think overall it's going to be a fun matchup. I'm not super optimistic as we sit here now.
Yeah, so it's fun for other teams to watch, maybe less so for Steelers fans who have watched Mahomes carve up the Steelers in all 3 meetings. He's got 14 touchdowns and 1 interception, I think, in the 3 games, including the wild card win in 2021 when he's playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, and really had one of his breakout games in week 2, his second season, that really helped put him on them. And I should mention as well, this game will be, as another layer to this one, on Netflix. So in local markets where I'm at in Pittsburgh, for KC, it will be on television. But for you guys, since Ross, you're in Nashville, and Joe, you're up in the Boston area, you guys will have to fire up your Netflix account or take somebody's password or something. So it'll be the first time a football game is shown on Netflix. Hopefully that goes well, but we'll have to wait and see.
It's a dirty trick because Netflix just took away password sharing over the last 6 months. Yeah. So
get out. Now you gotta, you better buy it. You got to buy it.
That's right. I can't mooch off my parents' login anymore.
So you can't. How do they enforce password sharing? I mean, you can't log into if you went on a different computer with your account, you couldn't log in, or how does that work?
Yeah, it'll tell you like, hey, this isn't the location of the primary account holder. I think it lets you grant like a temporary. So hopefully my parents will just give me a temporary code. You can basically tell it like, oh, I'm traveling, and it'll give you 7-day access. So I'm hoping they don't shut that down, but I could see them making a move to limit that even to get more subscribers.
For sure. So, I mean, we can go through, the AFC North individually. I think the Ravens are still viewed as the favorite. The Bengals get Burrow back. I think the Browns are kind of always been a wild card because what happens with Deshaun Watson, that defense is so tough, and Jim Schwartz did an unbelievable job with them last year. I'll just kind of ask broadly, Joe, which team in the AFC North, should be the favorite, and which team will maybe get Pittsburgh the most amount of trouble this year?
I think the Ravens should still be the favorite. I mean, Lamar Jackson, obviously the reigning MVP. They didn't have a ton of roster turnover. I think really their biggest question mark is kind of going to be what Nate Wiggins can do at cornerback and what Roger Rosengarten or Daniel Falele can do at tackle. Those are kind of the 2 areas where, maybe there's a little bit of a question mark. But, I mean, Roquan Smith, Justin Madubuike, 2 studs on defense. Kyle Hamilton as well. And then Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers coming off an impressive rookie season. I mean, they're just such a tough team to beat. And they added Derrick Henry, like the most physical running back in football and the most physical division in football. Kind of a match made in heaven for them there. So yeah, the Ravens scare me, or should be the favorite, but the team that probably scares me the most is I would probably go with the Browns just because of that defense. And just the unknown of what Deshaun Watson can be. I mean, the Browns beat the Steelers last year with Dorian Thompson-Robinson starting. That was the Steelers' only AFC North loss, so maybe I'm a little influenced by that. I was at that game. It was terrible to watch. Kenny Pickett was an absolute mess, so hopefully maybe Russell Wilson or Justin Fields will figure it out. But, that Browns defense is so impressive. Just talent everywhere. Myles Garrett up front, Denzel Ward in the secondary. They're just it's a tough unit, and with how Pittsburgh's offense is looking right now, I'm not sure how it's going to be. So, and especially with, the one game coming off a short week, and then the other game is the tail end of that 4-game AFC North home span, just the way those games are structured, they could be a little bit scary. So, can't believe I'm saying I'm afraid of the Browns, but out of all the AFC North teams this year to give them trouble, I think Cleveland might be the one that can do it.
I'll say Cincinnati. They will have Burrow back, and you still have Chase and Higgins. And I know they swept Cincinnati last year, but both those games were versus Jake Browning. And prior to that, the Bengals were, I think, winning pretty repeatedly over the 21 and 22 seasons against Pittsburgh. So obviously, all three a challenge. Baltimore was a challenge, but Pittsburgh has won, 6 of the last 7 versus the Ravens. Always close games, always down to the wire. Ravens resting their starters in the finale last year. But the Bengals have really, I think, had Pittsburgh's number whenever they've had a healthy Joe Burrow. So I'll kind of give the nod there. And then week 18, Bengals, Steelers, that one probably has a lot of implications for both sides. But Ross, same question to you, just in terms of the biggest test and challenge the North will offer.
Yeah, I think the Browns currently are the most worrisome to me. I mean, all three are tough and really could go anyway. The Steelers probably won't have the same 5-1 record against the division this year. But the Browns in particular, I mean, when Nick Chubb was healthy last year for that, a quarter and a half before he got injured against the Steelers, he was running all over them. The Steelers had no answers. I mean, they didn't have Cam Heyward at the time. He was already injured with that groin. So there's, some reason to believe that maybe they won't have the same set of issues, but I mean, they didn't have their safety issues or their inside linebacker issues at that point either. So you can't really sit here and say the Steelers were undermanned. I mean, obviously, other than Cam Heyward, but yeah, Nick Chubb, if he's healthy and able to get back into form, which he has worked his way back from injuries before and been a threat, I think that's something that scares me. I mean, Deshaun Watson, he hasn't really paid off on the huge contract and trade they made for him, but at the same time, he's 8-4 as a starter in Cleveland. He hasn't really made them lose when he's played. Maybe hasn't been the reason they won either, but they have Amari Cooper. They traded for Jerry Jeudy. So they've got, and David Njoku. They have some weapons there on the offensive side of the ball. I think DeJuan Jones has a chance to be a very good tackle this year. I think he surprised a lot of people in his rookie season with how he held up when he was able to play. So their offensive line has some big guys, and then obviously that defense. I mean, are we going to see Devin Bush playing significant snaps in this defense? I mean, they've got Jordan Hicks and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, but they have the 4-3 system, and I mean, Devin Bush, they don't have a ton behind him right now. They drafted Nathaniel Watson, so maybe he works his way in there. But it's gonna be another game where we see Devin Bush play a decent amount. Last year he obviously played for the Seahawks and had like 15 tackles
all downfield. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so that'll be an interesting thing. The Steelers always love to see that matchup with Bush, just given his history in Pittsburgh. But I think the Browns scare me the most right now. Just the makeup of their team, how physical they are on both sides of the ball, and then they've got some additional weapons and, a healthy quarterback. We haven't seen what a full season of Deshaun Watson even looks like. And,
right.
More than likely this will probably be that year. So, yeah.
All right. That's the schedule. It's a tough schedule overall. I think it's from a last year's record standpoint, third hardest. Again, I take some stock into it. And obviously I think Chiefs will be good and the Ravens will be good, et cetera. But, last year we were talking about the end of Pittsburgh's schedule at, what was it? I think home against Cincinnati and then at Seattle, at Baltimore. They end up winning all 3 of those. They don't face Joe Burrow. They don't face Lamar Jackson. So you never know how the complexion of a season can change in terms of surprises, disappointments, injuries, and just the general unknown. But to kind of put a bow on the schedule, Joe, what do you like most about the schedule, and what do you like the least about the schedule in terms of how it all laid out?
I can start with what I like the most is that the Steelers will kind of have an opportunity to go on a little bit of a winning streak, week 6 to 10, kind of build up some goodwill and build some momentum heading into that brutal stretch from weeks 11 to 18. It's Raiders, Jets, Giants, bye week, Commanders. Those are games that they can win. They get a little bit of rest heading into the gauntlet of the AFC North and the Chiefs and the Eagles down the stretch. And then what I like the least is how it's structured with all those marquee AFC North games late in the season, and then the 2 very difficult non-divisional opponents and the Eagles and the Chiefs sandwiched in there. I just think it does them no favors. And I just don't really like it. So that's definitely my least favorite part of how it all kind of broke out for them. Maybe 2 of those games early in the season would be a whole lot better. You can put, Raiders or a Giants game in that stretch. Give them, not necessarily a break because there's no breaks in the NFL, but maybe a little bit of an easier opponent. So it's not just such a grind week in and week out, but we'll see how they manage it.
All right, Ross, same to you. What do you like the most? Which might be a tougher answer than what do you like the least, but what do you like the most and what do you like the least?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to like the most. Obviously, that stretch from 6 to 10, as Joe said, is where they can make up some ground if they drop a couple of those early games. Um, I think the travel miles aspect is good. I mean, they're the fourth least traveled on in the NFL this year. I think by the time they finish their week 2 game, they'll have already had 30% of their travel miles out of the way. Atlanta and Denver are the 2 of their 3 longest trips, with the Raiders being the other longest trip. So really, by the time they enter that final portion of the schedule, they're not going to have to deal with a ton of travel and adjustment there. So that part's kind of nice, I guess, if we're looking for a positive. And then, yeah, the negative, I think just going back to Ravens into Browns and Ravens into Chiefs, both on short weeks, that is about as tough as it gets at the back half of the schedule.
Yeah, in terms of what I like, I'm basically with Joe. That week 6 to week 10 stretch leading into that week 11 to week 18 finish is more favorable on paper. You get 2 home games, you get your bye week in there, you get at the Raiders, at the Commanders, 2 games that Pittsburgh should be favored in. That helps. In terms of what I like the least, there's a lot to choose from here. This obviously could be a great opportunity, and Pittsburgh again has had success against the North, but just that 4 in a row of week 11 to week 14, home against the Ravens, at Cleveland, Thursday Night Football, at Cincinnati, and then home against the Browns in week 14. It's just really tough. It may be truly defining how this team season goes, even before that last true stretch run, week 15 to week number 18. So just 4 straight. That's happened before. I think David said Washington in 21 had played 4 straight, divisional games since they went 1-3 over that span. It's just Chicago. I know Chicago is like Pittsburgh, where all their NFC North games are week 11 and beyond. I don't know if they play 4 in a row the way that Pittsburgh does. So both teams kind of getting that weird quirk in the schedule. But I just think 4 in a row AFC North. And then right after that, you go at Philly, at Baltimore, Chiefs short week, and then home against the Bengals is obviously going to be challenging. All right. I don't know if you guys have any more thoughts here on the schedule. I do want to get my one weird quirky stat. The week 17 Chiefs game, the first planned Wednesday game, not including the COVID year in 2020, which was not planned. The first Wednesday game Pittsburgh will play since 1936. So that's a fun thing there that maybe with the most fun part of the entire game, considering how well Pittsburgh has, or how well Kansas City has succeeded against the Steelers. So that's the schedule. I'm sure Dave and I will go over things, him and I, on Monday's show. Let's jump into the other story of the day. That is going to be one Cam Heyward reporting coming out right around schedule release time on Wednesday that Heyward, and he confirmed this on his podcast, he will not report to OTAs, the voluntary portion of OTAs. He will skip them as he looks for a contract extension. He's in the last year of his contract right now. There's been a lot of media chatter even before this news came out about a potential extension with him. He's 35 though, would not be cheap to extend out. Again, Dave and I'm sure we'll talk about that, and he'll go through some of the numbers and some of the salary implications. But Joe, I'll start with you. Your first of all, is this a story in itself in the sense of Heyward not being at OTAs? Does that really matter just on that part alone?
I don't really think it matters. I mean, he's coming off an injury. He's older. He wasn't going to get a lot of reps anyway. He would have stretched and done a few walkthroughs. Like, it's fine. He's Cam Heyward. He's proven himself. It's a story in the sense that he's the longest tenured Steeler, and it's a team that's, kind of had some issues in the past with kind of their veterans and end of their career and figuring out contract. And now it kind of seems to be, that same deal over again. So that's where it becomes a story. Right now, I'm not paying too much mind into it, but let's say it drags out into mini camp and maybe in the beginning of training camp, then it becomes a much bigger story. And then you start to worry about how it's going to affect the locker room, the chemistry. But him not being at OTAs right now is really not that big of a deal at all. It just, the optics of, Heyward being Heyward and the Mr. Steeler now, like the longest tenured guy in the room, not being there. Maybe that's where the story aspect comes in, but from performance perspective, it doesn't really matter.
Ross, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. Overall, I don't think that it's probably going to turn into some big distraction as you know, some of the, I guess, knee jerk reactions have maybe indicated. I think, you know, in terms of extending him, I'm in favor of giving him an extension. I don't know exactly what the money stuff will look like. I know Dave has an article or two up on the site discussing some of the possibilities there that you guys should check out. But, you know, he was still, even playing on one leg last year, in his own words, still one of the better, if not the best run defender on the team. The Steelers haven't really invested in the defensive line yet. I think they're probably, you know, due to do that next year, and next year's draft pretty high up. I think that there are some talented defensive linemen just from an early look in college football due to enter the draft next year. And so that should align well for the Steelers. And I would love to have Heyward around, you know, when that rookie is in the room, just to help him kind of acclimate to the league. You know, Heyward's the kind of guy that is going to take these guys under his wing. He's a good locker room guy, a good leader. And so I like the idea of having Heyward around for when they actually do invest heavily in the position, hopefully next year.
Which they've been putting off, because we thought for quite some time they could do it the way they did with Heyward, drafting him, you know, before they had to find a replacement for Aaron Smith and Brett Kiesel. I think Smith, his final year was Hayward's rookie season. Then Kiesel played, I think, 3 more seasons after Heyward was drafted, before Heyward really his third year became a starter. Joe, before I weigh in, because I've had a lot to say about this on Twitter and on the site, do you think this team should extend Heyward? I know it's a little difficult to answer because it depends on contract and parameters and structure, but just on a baseline level, 35-year-old defensive tackle, should he be extended?
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to be a little bit wary of how much guaranteed money is going to be down the line. Let's say 2026 maybe. But as of now, I mean, yeah, he, like Ross said, last year he was probably the best run defender on the team, playing through that core muscle injury. He never really got fully healthy. And when he is fully healthy, he's still, I mean, what we saw 2 years ago, he's still a very, very talented player. He can be a leader for the defensive line. And right now, the defensive line, you know, I think Larry Ogunjobi's a little bit of a question mark. He wasn't great last season. I think we're going to see a lot more out of Keanu Benton this year, but there's still not a lot of like talent behind him. So I think he kind of got to, you know, if he wants to keep playing and he can play at a high level, or thinks he can play at a high level, then yeah, I think it's worth extending him. Even, I mean, great locker room guy, great community guy, which, you know, not gonna affect the team obviously, like on the field, but it matters a little bit, especially in Pittsburgh, with how they run that organization. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, I do think he should be extended.
We might be in the minority here, because what I've seen on Twitter, and that's just, you know, one section of the voice of Steelers Nation, but the sentiment that I found is that people do not believe he should be extended. And I understand the case. He's 35. He came off the groin injury last year. At some point, Father Time wins all battles. He will eventually win that battle versus Heyward. And so there is a level of risk if you extend out Heyward, because you don't see a great and long track record of 35-year-old interior defensive linemen who have had success and really even played at the age that Heyward is at right now. But Heyward is not like your typical defensive tackle. I mean, Dave and I will talk about this. I want to get his thoughts on the money structure. And, you know, David talked about early in the offseason, this team, maybe they'll just kind of do an extension without any new money and just reduce the cap charge this year and kind of be able to shuffle that money around a little bit without really giving him true new money. I think even under a kind of, I guess, quote unquote, I'm probably misusing the term here, but true extension, it's not a fully guaranteed contract. And if you don't guarantee the base salaries of the 2025 and 26 season, which Pittsburgh probably won't do, then there is going to be less risk. There's a signing bonus. There's going to be some dead money if you had to cut them. But I think a 2-year extension is just fine by me. What I would come down to in terms of how do you know if Heyward's going to decline, and nobody can predict the future, you know, perfectly. But once his strength goes, once his physical strength is diminished, that's when he won't be an effective player anymore. And I think even last year, as you guys mentioned, coming back from the groin injury, really rushing back, probably playing too soon, but he was really wanting to get back to help out the team. His strength was still there. He was still stout against the run. Generally speaking, I did my defensive charting. When Heyward was on the field, teams only averaged 3.6 yards per carry, the best of any Steelers defensive lineman in Pittsburgh last year. So there still was, I think Pittsburgh without Heyward was like 27th in yards allowed and 25th in yards per carry allowed. When he returned, they were, I think, 12th in yards allowed and 10th or 13th in yards per carry. So you saw a big uptick in the run defense there. So I think as long as Heyward still has his strength, then he's still going to be an effective player. Once that goes, then he won't be, because he's all about stout at the point of attack against the run, long arm, bull rush, collapse the pocket. That's always been the way in which he's won. So again, I get the risk there, but there have been D tackles that have succeeded age 35 plus: John Randall, Alan Page, Kyle Williams, Calais Campbell at 6.5 sacks last year for the Falcons. Again, those are some, gaudy names I'm mentioning, but Heyward is I think I would consider him to be a borderline Hall of Famer. Probably not Canton bound, retired today, but he's, there's an argument to be made there. So I know some people want to see the season be played out. I'm okay with an extension. And again, it's not just about what he's done, but where he's at currently. And he means a lot to this team. They are worse off without him. That's been proven every time he's not been on the field. There is no succession plan. So again, it would depend on structure. Have to kind of see those types of things. But I will, even though it may be the minority voice, I will bang the table and say give Cam Heyward an extension. But I think you guys are in agreement. I want to see what Dave has to say on Monday's show. We can't get into contracts too much because it's not really our forte like Dave, but I do wonder what that extension would look like. I guess the question, to shut myself up here for a second, is do you think an extension happens? Do you think Pittsburgh will actually extend Cam Heyward? And if so, when that could occur? So Ross, I'll ask you, when and if, what do you think happens?
Yeah, when, I don't know if I have a great answer for that, but I do think one gets done. I mean, just looking at the market
before camp, I guess before camp is kind of like the really line in the sand.
Right. Yeah. Before camp, definitely. I can't see them letting this thing drag out into camp or risking any situation where Heyward has to, make himself the bad guy there, especially after winning Walter Payton Man of the Year and just kind of being Mr. Pittsburgh, as Joe said. But I do think they extend him. You look at what is out there typically on the defensive line kind of veteran market. I mean, you're either paying just an obscene amount that the Steelers probably aren't going to pay, somebody on the free agent market, or you're bringing in a guy like Larry Ogunjobi, who you're still paying a lot, but maybe isn't maybe worth that contract amount. So I do think that they extend him with the idea of drafting somebody early next year.
Joe, what do you think in terms of the when and the if and all those possibilities?
I'm going to call my shot and say it's going to happen on June 10th. It's the day before mandatory minicamp. So Steelers maybe just want to get him signed, situation over with, having motivated Heyward back for minicamp, head into training camp. Everybody's happy, kumbaya. So that's a pretty easy day to peg. I mean, I think it could happen afterwards, but I don't think there's any way, even if he doesn't have an extension, that he skips mandatory minicamp. Then that still becomes a story. And he made a point on his podcast that, hey, this is all voluntary. He's not missing anything that he has to be at. But I think that's that's a day that I think they could make it happen. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, if he goes to mandatory minicamp without a contract, he'll probably do nothing while he's there. Didn't maybe Deontay do that 2 seasons ago, I think? I mean, the guys will attend. You see, it's maybe the effective hold in, which is what happens in training camp. Nobody holds out anymore. You just go to training camp and you're standing on the sideline and just not participating. I don't know if it'll happen before minicamp. It may take some time to kind of figure out exactly what Pittsburgh wants to do. I mean, I think a deal will get done. And I say the line in the sand for training camp. I mean, it could happen after training camp. It's not going to be the most consequential thing, but it does become a story at that point. I think a legitimate one if Heyward does not have a contract and he's holding in during training camp. I think that becomes a legitimate story to talk about. It's really not one from the standpoint of him not being at OTAs when this team reports next week. But we'll see. I mean, listen, this team surprised me on not picking up Najee Harris's option. They could look at it and say, there's a risk if you pay a 35-year-old defensive tackle a 2-year type of extension, through age 37. I mean, I can understand, that side of it. So with Omar Khan, it's been a little surprising on some of the moves he's made. I won't guarantee it. I think it gets done, but if it doesn't, what if Pittsburgh says, we just don't want to extend you, Heyward, to 35, but we're going to let the season play out? I wonder where that goes from there. It could get kind of messy.
Yeah. What percent chance? I mean, he said, we'll see. I want to finish my career with Pittsburgh, but we'll see. How much of that you think is just kind of negotiation talk, and how much do you think is legit there? Could you see a scenario that he ever plays for another team?
Oh man, that's hard to even think about. I mean, it's happened. Mike Webster in Kansas City, Frank Harris in Seattle, and so you never want to say never to those things. With the we'll see comment, I mean, I think it's just filler. He said that every year when he was like contemplating retirement. I want to come back, but we'll see. I mean, he's always said that kind of stuff, so I don't really put much stock into that particular phrase. I just wonder if Pittsburgh says, puts their foot in the ground and says, we don't want to extend you. You're 35, and we just don't want to. Besides a quarterback, have they ever extended out somebody who was 35 years old? I mean, there probably have been many opportunities to do so, but probably haven't really ever done that. So I don't know what their approach, if they're kind of a bit more the analytical side, when you see them decline nausea, they kind of putting on the math hat in terms of just his age. I think it will get done, but it will be interesting to see kind of the timeline of when it might occur. Or do you understand the other side? Because again, the case against this is the age, and there's a lot of fans who just want to see him play the season out. Joe, do you understand that argument? And what would you tell somebody who says, "Listen, the guy's he's old and he's hurt last year, and there's going to be a fall off, and there's too much risk in trying to do a long-term deal with him"?
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely understand it, especially coming off of the injury. Like, we don't know. I mean, yeah, he had his strength when he came back last year, like you said, and that's going to be the decline because the bull rush is really, where that's his bread and butter. But he's 35. He's working out now, but doing his own thing. But I can fully see why people wouldn't want to pay him. We don't know if he comes back next season, all of a sudden he's not the same player. Like it's a real possibility, unlikely, but it's a real possibility. So the people who just throw it out there as just don't pay him because he's old. He's the heartbeat of the defensive line right now. The defensive line's not that good. They kind of need him. They want to contend this season, so it's not as if they're like going to be a 7-win team and he's just kind of finishing out his career just for the sake of doing so. He's going to be a key piece on a competitive team and a team that's going to win with a very strong defense. So I think they kind of need him, and keeping him happy will be, by extending him, is going to be important. But I can completely understand why people wouldn't want to do it. But given, where the Steelers are right now, I think it makes a lot of sense because he has proven that when he's healthy, he's still one of the better defensive linemen in football.
Yeah, I guess the question is, will he continue to be? He's proven that in the past, but will he be going forward, Ross? That's kind of the sticking point of projecting out what, not just 2024, because it's not about 24. I mean, I think we can all agree this year you'd expect Heyward to play well, but what about 25? What about 2026? That's where it gets a bit more into the unknown.
Right. Yeah, no, I understand that part of it. I think the fact that he worked his way back from the injury last year and came back on the field despite being hobbled, I think that kind of shows where his mentality's at, and where his, despite being 35 years old, he worked his way back through stuff that required surgery and then an additional surgery to clean up in the offseason. And so I think that shows a little bit about, where his body's at. I think if Father Time truly was winning, he wouldn't have been able to come back last year and play through that type of stuff. And so that part is encouraging to me, but no, I understand. There is a lot of projecting going on. I just think what is the alternative? You let him walk, and then the defensive line is in big trouble beyond 2024.
Because I don't know if Ogunjobi will be a Steeler in 2025. I know he's under contract, but if he does not have a really good season, I think it's hard to justify his salary. I'm still kind of bewildered by that contract. I thought it was to extend him out, but the 3 years, $27 million was a mistake at the time. Dave and I were surprised by that, and I think it's not proven to be worth the money. So you're going to replace both Heyward and potentially Ogunjobi next year would be very difficult to do. So again, the bottom line is it's not about paying him for an achievement award and for his great career. It's where he's at now. And I still think he's a talented guy. And yes, there's some question with the injury last year, and he's not as productive last year, but he's healthy and he still showed his strength last year. And it was a groin injury. It wasn't a knee thing where you worry about long-term ramifications and is his body breaking down with repeated recurring injuries and things like that. I'm not seeing that with Cam Heyward. If I did, could be a different story. It's been just freak one-off things. Wouldn't even call the groin injury freak. He had it all. partially tore it the first day of practice in camp last year, I think, and they tried to manage him, and they hoped they could just kind of get through it. And then, of course, week one, he completely tore it, then had to undergo surgery. So it was just kind of one of those things that, in hindsight, maybe they could have approached things differently. I don't know. It's all, it's all in the past. So we'll see. Well, I mean, that's kind of answered everything, I guess, right now. I think it will get done. I think before camp is probably when I say it gets done. I don't know if it'll get done before June 10th, though, like Joe thinks.
I guess the other part
that's in 3 weeks, right, Joe? I mean, that 3 weeks. I don't know if the deal's going to get done by. It could, but I don't think it will.
Yeah, it's coming up soon. It's kind of, I mean, I think it's aggressive. I think I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it dragged longer. Just if he's showing up for minicamp, he's in the building, they can talk it out. I ultimately it probably will drag out longer, but I could see that being, the logical date just because of how it works out. But yeah, I wouldn't, but I do think it will get done before camp. That's that like you said, that's kind of the point of this. I mean, they've gotten extensions done during camp, but I think in this case it'll happen, before camp. So at some point, before whatever July 26th or whenever it's going to start. I don't think we have the date yet.
Right. Ross, were you going to say something? I think I cut you off there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think with the off-season cleanup surgeries he had, one was to kind of further clean up the core and groin stuff. I think there may have also been some kind of minor knee thing as well, if I'm remembering correctly. So that, I guess, adding another layer to the injury concerns, I guess that is another concern if he's having to have, I don't think we knew of any kind of knee injury leading up to that point, and some kind of minor, cleanup in that area, maybe I don't want to speculate, but yeah, I mean, I hadn't really been thinking about that. So in terms of just being worried about his injury stuff, that is a little bit concerning. The fact that there was multiple things.
Yeah, but I don't know the nature of it. It was obviously minor, whatever it was, and I can't recall perfectly all the details about that kind of stuff. And I'm betting when you play half the season in the NFL, basically on one leg, you have some issues with your knees, So again, that's a valid point, and regardless of the reason of why it occurs, you get some knee stuff at 35. Those things don't typically get better as you get older. But when I say the knees, I think about Ben and his knees. They were just torn apart from all the surgeries and scar tissue and arthritis and all the things he dealt with over the years. By the time he was, in his mid to late 30s, I mean, he just couldn't move anymore. And you just kind of knew that's why Ben retired. Everyone thought it was the elbow. It wasn't the elbow. His knees were shot. The dude just was a statue, and there was no power he could generate from his lower half. And so that was the bigger issue than it ever was the coming off the elbow surgery. So that's my stance on Heyward. I got a lot of pushback for it. Again, I understand the reasons against. I do think we talk about double-digit sacks. That's really pushing it historically. We talk about interior D tackles with double-digit sacks. I don't think anybody has done it at age 35. Maybe John Randall. Let me check that here. I think maybe Randall had done it. I have to let me look up when Randall is age 35 season. At 34, he had 11. 35, he had 7. 36, he had 5.5. So I don't think any D tackle has ever had 10 sacks at age 35 plus. I know Heyward had it the 2 years prior to 2023. So those days may be over, but even if he's still 7 or 8 sacks, which I think is, there's precedent for that, and really good run defense and claps in the pocket and, flushing quarterbacks out into TJ Watt's hands and Alex Highsmith's arms, there's a ton of value there. So that's my stance. Steve and I will talk about it more on Monday. I'm curious to get his thoughts on the structure and just whether he thinks Heyward should be extended or not. But it's a conversation that will continue until a deal gets done. All right. You guys have any more thoughts here in today's show? Joe, it seems like I have not watched the trailer for College Football 25, but the reviews seem pretty positive. I don't know if you've been checking at all, but people seem to be happy with whatever EA dropped.
Yeah, I have some tweet notifications on. I know Albert Breer was going crazy for it. Jordan Schultz said I think it was the best video game trailer of all time. So I'm excited to check it out. I did see too big news that they have cross-play and online dynasty up to 32 people. So that'll be interesting. You can kind of play with your friends, no matter if you're on PS5 or an Xbox. So looking forward to.
Joe, what are you? Are you Xbox or PlayStation?
I'm a PlayStation guy. I've always been a PlayStation guy, getting back to PS2.
I knew I liked you for a reason. Yeah, I'm PlayStation too, so we'll have to definitely play or something. Ross, bring us back in here. Any other Steelers stuff you want to talk about?
No, I think that's all.
All right, so we will start wrapping things up here. No emails today. Dave has the keys to the email machine, but we'll come back on Monday and answer as many as possible. All right, time for my favorite part, trying to wrap up the show here, which I always forget to properly get ready for. So I'm going to him and a high in a second as I kind of get everyone's Twitter handles together. But thank you guys so much for being on the show today. Again, Dave will be back on Monday, and we'll get his thoughts on, obviously, the schedule, on Cam Heyward's outlook, and anything else that comes up along the way. And, of course, the team will begin their OTAs on Tuesday, and that'll run through Wednesday and Thursday as the whole roster comes together. So be sure to follow Ross McCorkle on Twitter at Ross_McCorkle. Follow Joe on Twitter at JClark1233. Follow Dave on Twitter at Steelers Depot. Follow myself on Twitter at Alex_. You want to email the show, have a question, be sure to email us at theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. And thanks for listening to The Terrible Podcast with Joe, Ross, and Alex.